So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. It's my joy to be with you and bring to you keen insights with my guests and the wisdom of the church and her saints in scripture every Thursday here for our marriage hour. Whether you want to be married, you're in the process of dating, or just looking for someone to date, or you're married. The goal, either way, is marriage, right? And so we come with multiple perspectives during this hour. And I'm really interested to know if you're interested in getting married. I have to say, don't be afraid to say it. It's interesting. There's been a surge in what looks a whole lot like arranged marriages with various applications, programs, and even new television shows and series. I actually think that this whole arranged marriage idea is part of the solution to both meeting someone and settling down to start a family. Just hear me out. Cristina Pineda of Matchmakers in the City will join me in just a little bit here on Trending. So don't go away, because we'll be talking about arranged marriages and interfaith dating. Does it really matter if you date someone who isn't Catholic, isn't even Christian? We'll talk about the do's and don'ts, and we would love to hear from you. If you'd like to weigh in on the conversation during the show, the number's 1-888-914-9149. Or you can contact me via my Instagram story, where I put a question box up with a show description and the opportunity for you to ask a question during the show. So if you're not following me yet, head over to relevantradio.com/trending, or on the right-hand side, you can connect via social media, especially the Instagram, because we have fun here. Instagram stories, fun family photos, you name it, we've got them up there. I would love to connect with you. So get this. I think that this story is so sweet. Two high school sweethearts married each other, and now it's 46 years into their marriage. They live in Texas, and the wife was actually diagnosed with not only ovarian cancer, but breast cancer as well. That's Janice Beecham. Now, Janice Beecham and her husband, and by the way, let me just tell you this. Her husband has suffered 2 strokes in the last decade. One of them actually interfered with them celebrating one of their anniversaries. But what happened is, as Janice is battling cancer, both her and her husband end up coming down with COVID-19. Her husband was insistent that COVID was not going to take away from him celebrating his anniversary with his wife. And it didn't. They've both recovered, and not only have they recovered from COVID-19, but they've both recovered from cancer. This is such a cool story, and can I just say how sweet this couple, through sickness and in health, are together with that beating heart of a marriage 46 years later. Now, this actually reminds me of a topic I really want to dive into today. I've been reading over the years the wisdom of St. John Chrysostom, also known as the Golden Tongue. Now, he has a lot to say, actually, about marriage. I have this really sweet book on a number of sermons and writings he put together discussing marriage. I remember some years ago when I read it, his writings always just struck to the core with me when it came to marriage. And so in prepping for this show, I thought, you know what, it's pretty cool to hear the story of these 2 high school sweethearts and their 46 years of marriage, because there's a trend I'm seeing right now among my friends who have left the church, even after a good Catholic education and growing up within a Catholic home. You see, part of the reason they leave, in short, it could be partially an excuse, but I would argue a lot of what was modeled to them is that they've left and they point to the hypocrisy of their Catholic parents and how sometimes they used their Catholicism to manipulate or control or it was just hypocritical with how they lived it out. And so I see many millennials and younger, even entering into Gen Z as they enter into their adult years, who point to marriage and the false living out, ultimately, I would say, of Catholic marriage as a problem. And so here's my question. What happens when the Catholic ideal of marriage is actually sought out and lived? You see, I've been reading St. John Chrysostom this week, and here's something interesting he says. He says there's no relationship between human beings so close as that of husband and wife, if they are united as they ought to be. Let me just repeat that last part again. If they are united as they ought to be. This is the most powerful relationship in our culture today. And it makes me think back to Genesis chapter 2, after God has created Adam and Eve, and he tells them not only already to be fruitful and multiply, but that the two will become one flesh. We often reduce this to the sexual complementarity in the creation of new life. But good fruits are also born in the culture and in that relationship where there's this union of persons, a union of mind, that the two are so united, not that they always share the same opinions, but there's this cooperation, collaboration, and communication that's so important. I'm going to throw those out there. 3 C's. Let's see if I can remember them. Cooperation, collaboration, and communication. So important for living that one flesh union that the church from the beginning of time has emphasized. So here's the question. How is this quote unquote united front, or the most powerful relationship in the culture, lived out by us sinful human beings? Well, I have to start by saying this. It's not by contradicting one another. Now, I talked about those 3 C's just a moment ago, the good ones. But you see, the problem is that people think, well, to have this one mind and this great union, that means we can't have any differences or any disagreements. That's actually not true. It's just the important element of not contradicting one another in, let's say, a condescending way, a harmful way, an uncharitable way. In fact, there's a quote that I love from St. John Chrysostom that he says, he gives this example of comparing marriage, the husband and wife, to an army and its generals. He says, when the generals of an army are at peace with each other, everything proceeds in an orderly fashion. And when they are not, everything is in disarray. It is same here. He's talking about how when the husband and wife don't have this cohesive complementarity, things aren't as ordered. There's this disarray that occurs. But when there is this union of persons and this complementarity, the army, that is the unit of the family, functions really well for the betterment of the children all the way into their adulthood, into their own marriages and vocation and family. It has an incredible ripple effect. There's this quote that I'm going to paraphrase from Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And she talks about how if you want to change the world, basically you don't have to do that much. It's just like you dropping a stone into the water and it creating this ripple effect. So in other words, yes, you can go out and change the world, but you do it with the small actions of your day. The good that you do. You don't have to have this major platform or huge influence. It's just the good impact you have on those around you and even on yourself day in and day out. So look at what happens when this becomes a reality. And I'm just going to say hashtag marriage goals or even relationship goals because, right, we're working toward marriage anytime we're dating or looking for someone to date. So here's another quote that we can unpack here. St. John Chrysostom says, the love of husband and wife is the force that wields society together. Do you hear that? That the love of the husband and wife really propels society forward and together. Think about it. the human development of both the man and the woman, and their flourishment, both of them and their children, the authentic love that's meant to be lived out in marriage, and mercy. It's not just a matter of giving others what they deserve, but going over and beyond. You see, also, this establishes a lasting faith among the couples and their children. I mentioned at the beginning of introducing this topic how I'm seeing so many of my friends who have left the faith who often point to the hypocrisy of their quote-unquote Catholic parents. I think that part of that has to do with we've not looked enough at this ideal and really strove to move toward it. We make excuses and we forget the important element of God's grace working through the sacrament of matrimony. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. Joining me in just a few minutes here will be Cristina Pineda, the matchmaker from Matchmakers in the City. Another comment that St. John Chrysostom made is about how when this ideal of marriage is lived out, men will take up arms and even sacrifice their lives for the sake of this love. This made me think of whether or not most single men are willing to fight for this ideal of marriage and for love in the same way that they would have been willing to before. If you think to the examples during World War II, so many of those men who fought for love of their family, for keeping the quality of life and the freedom of religion possible. That was the hope that drove them forward. You see, so many men are looking, searching hungrily for a mission. Maybe they don't chase marriage or even seek after dating or meeting someone because they're hungry for this to be lived out in an example that's witnessed to them, and because they're also waiting to see a woman who's willing to embark on this same mission that's laid out before us. Now, one more comment from St. John Chrysostom on this. He says, when harmony prevails, the children are raised well and the household is kept in order. He goes on to say that when it is otherwise, everything is thrown into confusion and turned upside down. You see, this is why we have strong language in Scripture, even the New Testament. People like to say that the New Testament's soft. I don't know about you, but I think the New Testament is pretty challenging to be lived out. I mean, let's see, this co-submission of husbands and wives that St. Paul talks about in Ephesians 5. And then he goes on to emphasize the authority of the husband and how the wife is to be submissive to her husband. Remember, what does submission mean before you get your hair out of whack and start marching out of the church and ripping off your wedding ring? This is what it means. Sub means under. So submission means to be under the same mission as the husband, to be under the same mission ultimately of God, which is why actually St. Paul, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, gives an even more challenging kind of a lifestyle goal for men. He says that husbands are to lay down their lives for their bride, the same way Christ did for the church. You see, God challenges us to this co-submission, right? That one body, that one flesh union between husband and wife. Then he lays out the authority of the husband and the family to be the leader. But then he ultimately says, you want to be a leader? Lay down your life for your family. Sacrifice everything. This is how the peace of Christ and the grace of the sacrament will reign within your home. And this is why St. John Chrysostom, when talking about what St. Paul just said in Ephesians 5, actually comments and says, why else would St. Paul say, wives, be submissive to your husbands as to the Lord? Because he's laying out this Christian ideal of marriage that is the heartbeat of society and for the flourishing of the human person. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. Thanks for joining me today. If you have a question during the show, go ahead and give us a call the old-fashioned way at 1-888-914-9149, or go ahead and comment on my Instagram story. I would love to hear from you. Now, I said this earlier today that I think that arranged marriages, that's right, arranged marriages, are actually a part of the solution for people who want to meet someone, get married, and start a family. So listen up as we explain and break this down. So my first exposure to arranged marriages was actually in college. I had a number of friends who were from the Indian and Chaldean Catholic communities. Now, arranged marriages for them was not about trading camels or forcing someone to marry someone. It was actually about the father leading and some of the other men in the home to find a faith-filled person to bring about the best possible option for his daughter to possibly marry and start a family. They weren't forced to marry. It was an option and almost like an introduction, but a little bit stronger of an introduction. So I'm going to talk about arranged marriages today with my guest, Cristina Pineda. She joins us regularly here on Trending. She's a matchmaker for the organization that she co-founded with her sister called Matchmakers in this city. Cristina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Timmery. I'm so excited to dive into these topics. We have a lot to talk about.
So there's been this huge resurgence of interest in arranged marriages. We see it in some of the various television shows that we've actually talked about here on Trending, such as Netflix show Love is Blind, as well as a Lifetime show Married at First Sight. Can you give a little insight as a matchmaker into why there's been this surge in these shows and how they're sort of arranged marriages as well?
Sure. And then the newest one is Indian matchmaking, which is literally the traditional old school arranged marriage prototype. So these new Netflix shows are more of a modern take on arranged marriages. And I think that this is stemming from a few things. The first thing is that with the endless dating options that people are facing with online dating and dating apps and swiping, they have begun to feel a sort of decision paralysis, and it has led people to be sick of dating and yearn for fewer choices and more stability. The term decision paralysis means the complete lack of the ability to decide. And we see this so common in our culture in my industry, at least. People come to me and it's just overwhelming how many options they have, but they need someone to help them, I guess, guide them through the sea of options to the right person. And so that's the first thing. The decision paralysis is terrible. And then they're yearning, as you were saying in the beginning of this show, is we all long for that covenantal marriage relationship between a husband and a wife. It's a sacrament, which means a sign of God's love. Let's delve into that a little more. We want to know that we are known and loved and find that person who is bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh, which is from Genesis. This desire in our hearts, you hear the people on these shows saying it in different words, but they say, "Oh, I just want someone who will love me even when I'm," one of the characters from Love is Blind said, "even when I'm old and not as attractive as I am right now, and he'll still love me." So that's that sense of that deep, undying love that we're all craving. And this helps us understand God's incredible love for us. So all these people are joining these shows. There's so many people, thousands of people who apply to do an arranged marriage. And then there's millions of people who are watching and rooting for these people. And so these shows have hit a nerve with our culture that is so much about very hedonistic, very do what you want, when you want it, with whoever you want it. That's not satisfying people. They want this covenantal marriage, and these shows may not be perfect, but they are showing a glimpse of that.
I love this. And I even look at it how even The Bachelor, in a sense, is an example of an arranged marriage. You have it arranged of who the man is going to be, and you have only a small handful of candidates for the women. So, when people think, wow, Tim, you're really saying arranged marriages might be a solution to what's going on in the culture? We'll explain that a little bit more. But can you explain kind of what's the difference between these shows and a real life setup? And is a real life setup like an arranged marriage?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think there's certain of these shows that have a little more problems than others. For instance, Married at First Sight, you really are getting married and then you're stuck in that marriage. Otherwise, you have to get a divorce. So that's a little more extreme than the other ones. With us, it's more like The Bachelor, where we're introducing women and men to each other and they're deciding if they want to continue seeing each other or not. So I guess in a certain sense, it can be seen as pseudo-arranged marriage. However, the Indian matchmaking show, she talks about how it's very quick courtship. So they meet a few times and then they're on to engagement, and then marriage is a huge industry in India. So it's a lot faster for the Indian culture, and then these shows have different twists on it. So our understanding of it is more of a laid-back understanding of arranged marriage, I guess, with matchmaking.
Right.
But it still is, the common thread of all of these is that all of these people who are doing these shows or even working with a matchmaker desire to push past their limitations to find true love that is grounded in shared values rather than simply physical appearance. So even the most extreme of these shows, there is something very courageous about these people taking that leap of faith and saying, you know what, I may not be right all the time. I may need someone to help me, and I may need to put this in God's hands more and stop just shooting myself in the foot and always getting in my own way to find true love.
Now, Christine, I have a question for you. You're a faithful Catholic as well as a matchmaker, matchmaking both people who are secular and people of faith. As Catholics, what do we think about arranged marriages, and does this inhibit in any way free will?
Yes, I know, because I'm torn because I love your comment earlier about you think it might be part of the solution. And the people in arranged marriages typically have the ability to say no. The families involved, as you said, it's screening the people who they're dating. Otherwise, we do live in a culture that you really don't know who you're dating. We live in big cities. I tell our members this, we live in huge cities where you don't know what the person's background is. Whereas with matchmakers, we are taking the place of the family almost and getting to know everyone, screening everyone, doing in-depth personal interviews, doing background checks, social media checks, sex offender searches, and to really get to see who these people are and to show our members things that they normally wouldn't see if they were just dating on their own. So I think there's a lot to be said for that, and then also the people's trust in this process, in us and in God, that He'll bring them the right person. But I would say in terms of free will, with us, we are not encouraging people to get into a relationship immediately and to get married immediately. We are recommending waiting 3 months before becoming exclusive and then into a relationship, and then at least a year before marriage, because there's no need to rush. The problem with certain arranged marriage cultures, and some people just are happy with what they get, and that's fine. But I think in our culture, divorce is at such a high rate that we want people to be really prepare before marriage and really get to know the other person. If someone's rushing you, there may be things that they're hiding. So that's why I definitely see it inhibiting free will in a certain sense, because also with annulments, if the person hid something from you, you can get an annulment. And why have to go through all of that drama that you don't have to by getting to know them properly in the beginning?
I think that my attitude when I hear the example of arranged marriages and kind of look at it in terms of the current television shows that we've seen and even some of the various applications and matchmaking in a sense, my take on it is that when I say could arranged marriages be part of the way to go, I think that it is in the sense that if only we were to speak more of our desire to get married, to have a family, and to not be afraid about it, not to obsess, but ultimately to throw those goals out there so that other people have the opportunity to introduce to us possible spouses like it used to be done for years before. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie with Matchmaker in the City, Cristina Pineda.
Catholic professionals find purpose and take your career to the next level by experiencing Tepayac Leadership Initiative. TLI is a 5-month experience, which you can access from anywhere in the U.S. Visit tliprogram.org to learn more. Turn your Catholic faith into the driving force in your career through professional development and spiritual growth. Go to tliprogram.org now. Be part of the next generation of Tepayac leaders. tliprogram.org.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to the Marriage Hour. We have our in-house matchmaker, Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City, joining us here on Trending. If you have a question, go ahead and give us a call at 1-888-914-9149 or head over to my Instagram story where you can go ahead and ask a question in that question box that I put up just before the show. Also, just a heads up, we have a new feature on the website. If you head over to relevantradio.com/trending, you can actually find all the locations to where you can subscribe to the show. Do you like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio? You name it, we are there. So you can either pull it up on your app or just make it real easy. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending. Click on that drop-down menu for subscribe now, and you'll see how you can connect to Trending and not miss an episode if you're not in your car. Now, I'm excited to talk about this next topic with Cristina Pineda, and that is interfaith dating. Does dating and marrying someone who's Catholic or even Christian for that matter really matter that much? There's been this attack on the Judeo-Christian culture in recent times, especially during COVID-19, but even for years before that, this radical difference of opinion over marriage, dating, human life issues, contraception, and so much more that makes it more challenging than ever to find common ground with people we might have had common ground with before. So, Cristina, you wrote a really interesting article about interfaith dating and really kind of compare this idea of destiny or disaster. One thing I personally feel is off the table is animosity to the faith. If someone has just outright animosity to the faith, even if they claim to be Catholic or nothing at all, that's a deal breaker for me. What do you think if a person is anti-religious?
That's exactly true, Timmerie, and I think a lot of our bachelors and bachelorettes have seen that in their own dating lives with trying to possibly, before they've come to us, it's called missionary dating, when you're trying to convert someone through because you want them to be that amazing future husband or future wife for you, but they're not there yet, and they could even be pulling you further away from your faith and the Lord. It can be very tempting because some of these people you could have an amazing connection with and amazing chemistry with, but they're really, and tomorrow's the feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola, so discernment is so perfect, but you really have to pay attention to, is this person drawing me closer to the Lord or pulling me further away? Whether it's someone who is very anti-religion, or it could be someone of a different faith, even if they do share the same values with you, they may be pulling you further away from God. And it's your personal journey of dating. So that's what I wrote about in this article. But especially you can go on a first date with anyone, but then if you do need to make it clear that, you know what, my faith is really important to me, and I do want that aspect if this is important to you. If this is true, say it. If it's not, it's different. But if you're listening to this show, probably it is. But that my faith is really important to me, I think you're great. I feel free to be friends, but I can't continue dating in that sense. That's what I would say to advise someone who might have gone on a first date with someone who was anti-religious.
Cristina, there tend to be two extremes when in the dating world. One is this perfectionism that the person has to meet every single element on my list. That may include faith, height, eye color, job, how much they make annually, you name it. It could be a number of things. But it also, on the other hand, people can sometimes be like, well, no one's perfect, and they're just kind of willing to go with whatever comes their way. We want to find a balance there. So ultimately, for the person who has that list of perfection, something has to give. But for the person who's maybe just going with the flow a little too much, they need to have an ideal. So if something has to give when dating, or something needs to be an ideal, should it be faith?
Right. This is a great question. And this is something that everyone needs to pray about. And as I said, if you're listening to this show, your faith is probably very important to you. But then you need to know that the person who you might marry might have a roommate right now. There are some women who come to us, or usually men don't have an issue with this, but that is a huge problem for them. And even if the guy is living on his own, it's not like he's living with his family, but if you want to share, if your faith is the most important thing to you and you want to share that in your marriage, there will be other more superficial qualities that will have to, as you said, will have to give. And that's fine. Those are not deal breakers. Those are preferences. Yeah, it would be great if he had a mansion and and all of this, but it's just, you have to think about what's realistic, and also take the advice of your matchmaker who you're working with, or if you're being date coached by a matchmaker. We've done this for so many years, and we know especially if you're working with someone who shares your faith, we know what truly is important and will make a marriage successful and will be a great relationship. Who will have the right building blocks for a positive relationship. So that's something that I think that, for instance, in Indian matchmaking, that the people were struggling with, that they have this list of very specific requirements, but most of the things on that list didn't have any true importance what would actually create a good marriage. And that's what the matchmaker was trying to tell them. So you do need to prioritize the most important elements when choosing your spouse, and know that no one is perfect. But also, as you said, there is that risk of being totally open. Oh, whatever. That's what we were talking about with the missionary dating situation. And then you do want, I would say probably 3 top qualities that you want when you're dating someone. And then a lot of the other things are more ancillary. And I would say the number 1 is eye color. I'm just kidding.
I'm taking notes here. I'm taking notes. I'm passing them on to my sister, okay?
Yeah, no, don't tell her eye color.
She does have an ideal with eye color, though. I'm totally ratting her out right now. My mom or someone listening is going to be like, you were being talked about on air today.
I understand, and we all have preferences, so I don't want her to feel like I'm coming down on her for it. But I would say number 1 would be faith. Number 2 would be some kind of attraction. And number 3 would be stability. Those, I think, are the top 3 characteristics, because they do combine the sense of, okay, we're going to grow together, and and want that covenantal marriage that we talked about in the first segment. And then we're drawn to each other. We do want to spend time with each other. We have a desire to help create that covenantal marriage, because if you're repulsed by the person, you're probably not going to have that desire. And then the third thing of just having stability is huge as well. And this takes different shapes, but generally for both men and women, it's someone who is grounded in some kind of career or passion that they love. And that looks like different things to different people. Everyone's coming from a different place. But especially if you want, as a woman, if you want a man who can provide for your family, that's going to be something to look at when you're dating. And maybe you're really attracted to this artist, let's say, and he's phenomenal in so many ways, but he really isn't the type that wants to be a provider. And that's something to pay attention to. Definitely. So and for men, for women, if a woman is flaking on you for dates and just unstable and complaining and crying on all of your dates about something new, that shows a level of immaturity, and maybe she's going through something really terrible, and that's awful. But you do want a certain level of emotional stability as well in your relationship.
We have a number of questions that have come in. I'd like to touch on them. First, from Sparta, Wisconsin, Joel is calling, and he has a question about the role of discernment versus might have lost John. We lost John. Never mind. Cristina, I want to actually changing topics here because I don't know John's full question. We had two other questions come in on Instagram. One of them is, what are your thoughts on dating an atheist? I'll give my first piece of feedback and then you can give yours. Personally, if the person's not Catholic, I personally would not date them. That doesn't mean as a Catholic that you couldn't date them, but from a Catholic perspective, you have to understand that this is what's called a disparity of cult, or if they have not been baptized, this is a big deal because you're actually not entering into the fullness of the sacrament of marriage, and you have to get permission within the church to still have a ceremony within the church, but it's not the same. Cristina, can you give kind of your opinion and thoughts, especially as a matchmaker who's seen examples of this, on whether or not to date an atheist?
Yes, I'm going to give two different stories. The first one, to illustrate it a little bit more, the first one is a bachelorette who I wrote about in the article that you mentioned, who was dating a man, and he was basically an atheist. He was encouraged her not to go to church, and little by little, and at first he said, oh yeah, I'm on board with you saving yourself for marriage, I'm on board with you, it's fine, you can go to church, that doesn't bother me, I'm going to do my own thing. But little by little it chipped away at her faith, and she stopped going to church. And then she ended up having this car ride discussion with him, which was a very much Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants moment, which I wrote about, that she asked him, do you believe in soulmates? And I'm not saying that I do, but he said, oh, I don't. I think that you'd meet anyone. It depends on location. You'd find someone else. If we were in a different city, I'd find someone else. That really hit home with her because she wants, and the whole term soulmate, I don't want to bring that up right now because we can go into that for an hour, but it's that sense of I'm not special, and okay, so he could just find another girl who, if he was in another city, and that if you're not believing that God brought you together or God had any hand in your relationship, that's going to be a problem, not just for your own faith and spirituality, but for your relationship. And she saw that. The other side of this is a bachelorette who was one of our clients, and one of our priority members, she was a little bit older, and so children weren't something that was possible for her at this point. But she was open to dating someone of different faiths. We ended up making her with a man who was baptized Catholic. He wasn't practicing at that point, but that wasn't important to her. She just wanted to practice her own faith, and as long as he was respectful of her, that was fine.
Right.
But he was very open to going to church with her, to learning about why she loved her faith, and when he fell in love with her, he fell in love with the Catholic faith. And he learned it from this new time. And she wasn't missionary dating. She wasn't pushing it down his throat. It wasn't something that she needed. It was a beautiful fruit of their relationship. And then he ended up coming into the church and getting confirmed a few months before their beautiful Catholic wedding. So this is a difference. He was more agnostic when they met. He was baptized Catholic, but pretty agnostic. But he wasn't an atheist and a militant atheist like the other guy from the other bachelorette. Mm-hmm. So these are two stories. You want to be, if you're going to date someone who's not Catholic and practicing, you want to be the second story, not the first.
Amen. That's such a good example. And I'll say one thing. If I were to date someone who wasn't Catholic, something that I would really be looking for, because again, this would be a no on my list. This is like the top priority, and I know you put it on your list as well, Cristina. If I was dating someone who wasn't Catholic, I think that a really important thing to look for is that they are someone who is seeking truth, that they look at things as black and white, that they can come to understand that something is true and that there's a moral dimension to it, and that they have humility in doing so, because I think that those are qualities that point to a type of person who would be open to developing a faith as time goes on.
Yes, I completely agree with that, Timmerie. That's beautiful advice and wisdom that I hope everyone listens to.
That's Cristina Pineda here on Trending with Timmerie, a regular guest. You can follow her on social media. We've gone ahead and posted links to her, but you can also find her at matchmakersinthecity.com. You can find links to that website on our social media pages as well. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie to talk about another important topic during our marriage hour, having to do with life. I want to share with you a little bit about what happens inside of a crisis pregnancy center, because this is really key to understanding some pretty important pro-life arguments, because I have to tell you, pro-abortion individuals often just cannot see where the help and resources come from for people who really do need help. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie.
Timmerie will be right back. You can reach her on Instagram and Twitter at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You know, that music is just really making me want to swing dance right about now. Dancing, a great way to meet someone. Actually, it's really funny. I notice sometimes like the older and older people get into their single years, the more common it is for them to take up social dancing. I think that's so much fun, a good way to interact with people. Personally, growing up in the dancing world, we're talking about this morning on Morning Air. I was up way too early today for this West Coast girl. It was the show, my segment of the show started at 5 a.m. Let's just say there are 2 rounds of coffee, and I'm not a coffee person. Anyways, I digress. We were talking about dancing, and in relation to the topic of marriage and dating, I think there's so much to learn about the complementarity of men and women in taking a dance class, in learning kind of the fundamental element that the man is meant to lead when dancing, and how that can be really challenging. That's a huge responsibility, and how for us as women, and this was a tough one for me, I had to follow. You see, I grew up with a ballet background and jazz and tap, and then all of a sudden you put me in a social setting. I can't just perform. Now I have to follow. You might have some little improvising moments, but that's challenging. Even if they mess up, even if they misguide you, you have to keep things smooth and have that cooperation, collaboration, and communication that we were talking about at the beginning of today's show as we were talking about the wisdom of St. John Chrysostom, one of the early church fathers, on marriage. So here's the deal. I want to talk about our crisis pregnancy centers. This is a mission near and dear to my heart. If you didn't know, I grew up in the pro-life movement and have been involved in pro-life activism, being a spokesperson on life issues, and even worked in a crisis pregnancy center for 5 years. And I have to tell you, I knew a lot about crisis pregnancy centers before I worked in one. But it wasn't until I worked in one that I really knew what they did. And every single day, I would be shocked by the miracles of what was done day in and day out for moms, babies, husbands, men, and for the overall community. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of the stories from my experience there. But I need you to understand something. There has been a massive attack on our crisis pregnancy centers over the last 10 years here in the United States. In fact, when I was working for one here in a few of them here in Southern California, we were battling in California the fact that we were being forced to make it really clear that we didn't provide abortions, and if we weren't a medical facility, we had to explicitly explain we were not a medical facility. But we never claimed to be a medical facility, so why would we have to state in all of our advertisement that we weren't a medical facility? It was very discouraging, and it was meant to prevent people from seeing us as credible and as a place for them to go and access help. Well, praise God, the Supreme Court and other intercession on this, legal battle, prayers, California crisis pregnancy centers are free to continue to do the work they do. However, over the last couple of weeks, a bill has come out of New York. And this bill, the New York Catholic Conference of Bishops heavily opposes. And here's why. Because this bill that's being proposed is proposing that there's a study done on crisis pregnancy centers. And the goal is to have this outcome to show that such services are too limited in denying pregnant women access to abortion. Why? Because we don't refer for abortions, and so the access and the services are too limited. But what business are we in? That's what's so confusing. It's telling us to work in a different business than what we're working in. I'm sorry, but we don't force a toothpaste company to sell candy. They're two totally different things. We don't even force a toothpaste company to sell deodorant. Yet that's sort of what's being done to a crisis pregnancy center through various bills such as these. Now, the authors of the bill really just have the ultimate goal of trying to discredit crisis pregnancy centers, making it clear that they are not health facilities and also that they don't provide a full range of women's reproductive health care services. So they want to put a label on crisis pregnancy centers saying, just so you know, this place has limited services. It would force even crisis pregnancy centers, even if they didn't receive government funding, to show what their funding sources are, to show what their services are, staffing operations, operation guidelines, their client demographics, and so much more. They would be forced to give a tell-all. This is just absolutely despicable and unacceptable. So if you live in the state of New York, please speak out against this bill. Get in contact with your New York Catholic Conference of Bishops to see how you can get involved in your state. But let me tell you a story of just a glimpse of the incredible work that crisis pregnancy centers do. I'll never forget the story of one girl who came into the center while I was there. And she was a girl who stayed close to the center for years while I worked there. She's someone who at the time was homeless, was on drugs, had poor exposure with regard to her family and the family situation that she was in. She found herself pregnant. By the intercession, the example, and the counseling, and the leadership shown by the counselors at our crisis pregnancy center, this woman was removed from the street, removed from that horrible family environment, chose life for her child, and we found her housing, car, helped her with education. And here's another beautiful element. Because people who loved her were people of faith, this young woman not only converted to Catholicism, but had her own son baptized Catholic. And with some years of healing, good examples, and the loving ongoing outreach of the counselors at the Crisis Pregnancy Center, this woman's married now. and is in an effective marriage, a good marriage. She wouldn't have had this example had it not been witnessed to her. Had people not been willing to help give her and get her the resources, not through the government, but out of charity and love, to help turn her life around. This is why our crisis pregnancy centers are so important, and we need to advocate, speak up, and donate to our local crisis pregnancy centers.